Hi, this is Brad Smith from BeerSmith.com. I want to thank you again for inviting me to the Queensland Homebrewing Conference. And I'm actually redoing this presentation because we had some challenges the first time around, had a couple technical challenges. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about BeerSmith 2 today. I'm going to jump to the first slide here. Self down in the corner. Okay, why should you use beer brewing software? Well, the truth is, if you want to, you can sit down anytime and do everything by hand. So if you have the patience and you have the time, you can sit down and write out equations for original gravity, final gravity, color estimates, mash infusion, water volumes, losses, all those other fun things. And you can calculate those on a spreadsheet. You can even do them with a calculator or even just a pencil. But it does take some time. For example, if you're going to do work with a recipe, you have to know all the ingredients colors, and you have to know all the ingredients potentials, and you have to know your batch efficiency, and all those have to get rolled up just to calculate, for example, a single thing like original gravity. So if you have tables with all those things, you can do those by hand, but quite honestly, software just makes it a whole lot easier. And that's why most people use software. It just gives you one place to go. It does all the calculations for you, and it makes it a lot easier so you can focus on designing the recipes instead of sitting down and doing the calculations. So what does BeerSmith do? Well, the main focus of BeerSmith is obviously recipe design. So what you can do with BeerSmith is build a recipe by picking ingredients from different sets of preloaded hops, grains, yeast, etc. So building a recipe is as simple as jumping into the program, adding a new recipe, and then picking ingredients for it. Now, of course, the program also calculates your original gravity, your color, and a whole bunch of other things in real time, so you can focus on designing the beer, so you can make fine adjustments to those as you're adding your ingredients for your beer. And then finally, when you're done creating a recipe, BeerSmith will actually print step-by-step instructions, sort of give you a checklist to walk through when you're completely done with a recipe, so you can take that out to your brew pot and walk through those step-by-step instructions and brew your beer. Now, obviously, besides the recipe designer, BeerSmith has a number of tools for recipe manipulation, so things like scaling a recipe. So, for example, let's say you grab a recipe off the internet and you want to scale it down to match your particular set of equipment. That's real easy to do. You can adjust the bitterness, the color. You can convert all grain to extract. You can change out equipment settings. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with the recipes themselves. And then there's a number of recipe management tools, like the ability to organize recipes into folders, share them in several different formats, including BeerXML, which is an open recipe format that a lot of different programs provide. You can share those recipes on the web. You can share those recipes with your friends. You can record data as you brew, keep track of session data, or variations as you go from batch to batch, for example. Some of the other BeerSmith functions include building a shopping list from a recipe, so you can take a single recipe and build a shopping list from it. You can manage your inventory of ingredients. There's tools for managing different equipment setups. So, for example, there's things from like mash profiles, fermentation profiles, carbonation profiles that I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes. There's over a dozen standalone calculators. These are things that you can use completely separate from the recipe system to do simple calculations that you might commonly use, like mash temperatures or unit conversions. There's a built-in calendar, there's reminders, and there's notes. So quite a bit of features in there in addition to the basic recipe features. What's new in BeerSmith 2? Well, I released BeerSmith 1 way back in 2003, and then 8 years later, released BeerSmith 2 in June of this year. And one of the biggest changes is I made it cross-platform, so the PC version and the Macintosh version look almost identical. You can work off both of those very easily. They'll be very familiar to you if you've used one. You can certainly make the switch over to the other, so that's a big plus. Tabbed browsing is another thing that's new. When you had BeerSmith 1, really you can only open one thing at a time, so you could open maybe one tool at a time or one recipe at a time, and it was very difficult to work with multiple recipes or compare two recipes. But in BeerSmith 2, you can now actually open these things in different tabs. So if you open up, say, a list of your ingredients, that'll show up in one tab, and you can open several recipes. Those will show up in separate tabs, and this is something that's very familiar to people who have used tab browsers in the web. For example, your web browser, most modern web browsers have tab browsing. And so it's something that's very familiar to most people and very easy to use inside the program now. So that's a major feature that we made. There was an improvement. We went to a graphical recipe designer, and this is the main recipe design view, so this is probably where you'll spend about 80% of your time in the program. And I'm going to walk through this for just a minute. So if you look in the upper left, you can see you've got name, equipment, the type of recipe, basic information goes in the top left there. And we'll talk more about equipment profiles in just a minute. On the right side, it shows a beer glass with color, which of course changes as you add and delete ingredients. There's a fairly large area in the middle for ingredients, and there's add buttons just to the right of that where you can add hops, grains, water profiles, other things to the recipe. And then there's a style comparison down below that, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's details at the bottom for mash and fermentation profiles and also carbonation profiles. And those give you a fair amount of flexibility also that we'll talk about in just a minute. And then in the bottom right, one of the challenges I had is that you always have limited screen space and you want to show as much as you can about the recipe. Well, different people, of course, wanted different things while they were designing the recipe. Some people might want to see the bitterness ratio displayed, and other people might want their boil gravity displayed, and other people might want to see their, how much is it going to cost to brew this thing based on the price of the ingredients. There's all these different things that you could potentially put there. So what I built is a system that allows you to add custom fields now, and you can actually select from over 100 different fields that are available for a given recipe, so you can get things like total calories, any number of things. Pick just the ones that you want to see while you're designing your recipe and put them in there. And there's room for about 13 of them. Now, what makes it easier? Well, one of the things that makes it easier is the current design is always compared against the style guide as you build the recipe. So, for example, it comes default loaded with the BJCP style guide. You can, if you're designing a dry stout, you can pull that up. And it'll do real-time comparisons of the original gravity, the bitterness, the color, and the ABV. And those little sliders in the middle will move back and forth as you add and delete ingredients. So you can kind of get yourself within the style range right off the bat. And it also lets you focus on the design of the beer instead of the details of how to do all the math. We have equipment profiles. This is one thing that I wanted to mention that was in BeerSmith 1, but has been expanded even in BeerSmith 2. This is also one of the most important things you want to do up front when you start using the program is you really need to create a custom equipment profile that matches your particular set of equipment, because these numbers in here actually drive all your recipe calculations. So, for example, if you're working with a simple brew pot setup for an extract brew system, you only have to put a couple numbers in here. If you're working with a very advanced all grain system, you need to put a little more detail in here. What's your mash volume? How much does it weigh? What's its thermal properties? Things like that. Fortunately, I did create several things to help you here. If you go to beersmith.com/video, you can view a video on how to set up your equipment profile. Or if you go to beersmith.com/support, there's also an article there on how to develop your own equipment profile. I mentioned you can adjust recipes. One of the most useful functions here is the scale recipe command, which is in the top left there. Once you have that equipment profile set up and from the previous step, you can pull any recipe off the web, click on that scale recipe command, select your own equipment profile, and BeerSmith will do all the adjustments to match that particular set of equipment. You can also use the scale recipe command to change the size of your recipe or to change the efficiency of your recipe. But the equipment feature is really powerful because, being able to match a given recipe to your particular set of equipment with just one click of the mouse is really a flexible thing, because it'll scale the grains, it'll scale the hops, it'll match the color, it'll do all those things instantly for you. There's also tools there for converting all grain to extract. There's tools for adjusting the gravity, bitterness, and color. So if you want to put in a specific color value, a specific bitterness value, you can just type that in and it'll adjust the hops additions or the grain additions to match that color or that bitterness. You can add an entire recipe to your shopping cart. And then on the far right, there's actually a button for brew steps, which gives you step-by-step instructions. This is another new tool that we added to the recipe designer. This is a grain percentage tool. Basically, what you do is you can go in and pick a set of grains. So let's say you add 3 grains. I've got pale malt, flake barley, and black barley here. Add a bunch of grains to your recipe, and now you can go in and change the percentage of those just by adjusting a percentage. So that's very flexible. You know, let's say you want a recipe that's 80% pale malt and it's 10% caramel malt and it's 5% specialty malts. You can go in and just type those percentages in, and then adjust the gravity after that, and you get a perfect match there. You don't have to do anything more to it. A lot of people wanted the Yeast Starter tool, so we added a Yeast Starter tool now. This is particularly useful if you use liquid yeast, which have a limited shelf life. You can actually go in and put the date of the yeast, and you do this both from within a recipe and as a standalone tool. So there's 2 actual separate calculators available here. But it'll calculate how many yeast cells you need and how many vials of liquid yeast you might need, or how large a starter you would need to create that number of cells in the actual starter when you kick off your batch. And a lot of people are using yeast starters these days. It does add to the overall quality of your beer, and this is a great way to come up with that estimate right off the bat. I mentioned mash and fermentation profiles very briefly earlier, but these show up actually in the design view. You can pick a mash or fermentation profile. And this is a very flexible thing. What it lets you do is jump in, and so for example, there's a whole bunch of preloaded mash profiles. You know, let's say you want a brew in a bag, and brew in a bag is new. We just added that in BeerSmith too. But let's say you want a brew in a bag light body beer. You can just go in and literally pick brew in a bag light body mash profile, and BeerSmith will go ahead and adjust all those steps and the grain amounts to calculate the correct temperatures for infusion, step temperatures for you, and everything. And it's really powerful because all you have to do is select that profile in your recipe, and all the math is done for you, and it shows up on the brew steps page. You can even define your own mash profiles, so very powerful there as well. And the nice thing is you build a mash profile once, maybe it's got 3 stages to it, and that's it. You can use it on any recipe. You don't have to worry about adjusting it for each recipe. And the same is true for fermentation and carbonation. On the right side, I'm showing a fermentation profile there for a lager. You can define your own fermentation profile with various temperature plateaus in it for each of the stages. And you define that once, and you can use it as many times as you want. And also, these things are preloaded too, so there's a number of preloaded profiles for each of those. There's a number of preloaded fermentation, carbonation, and mash profiles that you can use right out of the box without having to do anything to it. There's a lot of details available for advanced users. The design view there shown on the left, but there's also a yeast starter view. There's a mash tab. There's a fermentation tab. There's water and notes tabs. You don't have to use these if you don't want, but they're available for every recipe. So if you really want to go into detail on every recipe and, make sure your water matches up perfectly and enter detailed notes, look at your mash details, yeast details, it's all there. You can quite honestly, though, build a recipe right out of the design view and never even look at the other views if you like. And that works perfectly fine too. You can create a set of steps from there and go on. So these details are there if you want to use them. You don't have to use them. There's also space in there to record a lot of things. So you might want to record your actual volumes, your actual original gravity, your actual final gravity. And as you do that, of course, BeerSmith will show a bunch of actual calculations. So it'll calculate your actual alcohol by volume and a whole bunch of other parameters there from the actuals that you entered. Add-ons is a new feature in BeerSmith 2. Basically lets you go to an online database and pull down new grains, new recipes, new malts, new ingredients from within the program. And it's as simple as clicking on the add-on button and then going down and pick the ones that you want to add. If you want to add Cargill malts, crisp malts, or just a couple examples there, you click on those, you click on the install button, and they go right into your database, and you don't have to worry about them anymore. Same thing with the recipe packs. If you want to get a recipe pack from a given person, there's a variety of them available online. You just pick the recipe pack, and it'll show up as a separate folder under your My Recipes folder. This is a list of some of the standalone tools. I'm not going to walk through every one of these, but there's over a dozen tools you can play with here. Things for doing, hydrometer adjustments, refractometers, alcohol attenuation calculations. There's unit converters, and we'll talk more about unit conversion in a minute. A whole set of powerful tools that you can use, and a lot of these you just jump in. If you need to do something real quick, you pull up one of these tools and you enter the numbers, and you're good to go. I want to talk for a minute about inventory management. It is integrated all throughout the program, so you can start with a recipe. You can add the entire recipe to the shopping list. It'll add all the ingredients for that recipe into the list. You can take that shopping list, add it to the inventory. It'll go over into the inventory view. And then when you actually brew a recipe, you can remove it from inventory, and it'll pull those items out of inventory and put them into the recipe, if you will. A few cool tips that I thought you might share with you. First of all, many of you are going to be working in metrics, so the first thing you probably want to do when you open BeerSmith is go to Options/Units. So you go to the Options command, click on the Units tab, and you can turn everything into metric. There's a button at the bottom that says set the metric, basically. And then BeerSmith will work completely in metric from that point on, so you don't have to worry about that. The Australian style guide is in the program now. So if you go to Options Brewing and set the style guide to AABC, it comes at defaulted as a BJCP style guide, which I know some people use there as well. But if you want the Australian style guide, you can pull that up as well. You just pick it on that options dialog. A couple more quick tips. If you shift click on anything, it'll open in a separate window. So if you shift click on a recipe as you're opening it, it'll actually open it that recipe in a separate window. You can have multiple recipes open, and if you've got the desktop space, or if you've got multiple monitors, you can open several recipes at a time and compare them all side by side. One of the neat features within any field, anywhere in the program, literally, you can enter a number like 168 degrees Fahrenheit, for example, into a temperature field, and it'll convert that to Celsius for you if you're working in Celsius as your native units. Or if you enter 5 pounds 6 ounces in, and let's say you're working in metric, it'll convert that 5 pounds 6 ounces into kilograms. So basically, the program will do on-the-fly conversion. All you do is type in a given number and then type the units after it, and it'll do those on the fly. You can also do simple math in any field. So if you enter something like 184 plus 942, it'll do the math for you, and you can type that into any field. It recognizes simple operations, math operations like plus, minus, and so on. You can go to the Options Reports tab, and you can add custom reports in either HTML or text format, which is really nice. There's a water profile tool, and it has a new feature in it now, so you can select a water profile. Let's say you want to match London's water, so you start with your home water profile. You pick a target profile, this is in the water profile tool, target profile of London, and then you click, there's a button there that says Calculate Best Additions. You click on the Calculate Best Additions button, and it'll automatically go in and estimate what your best water additions would be. So what are the water minerals you need to add to match the London water profile? So that's kind of a neat feature. I want to mention some of the BeerSmith sites that I have. First of all, you can download a free trial at beersmith.com. There's online videos available, show you how to use the program, especially for the first time, at beersmith.com/video. I've got a discussion forum with about 17,000 members, pretty active, at beersmith.com/forum. In general homebrewing, I've got a number of things that I do all the time, actually. I blog every week, and there's actually a blog with over 140 articles on all kinds of different beer styles, all kinds of different techniques. And there's also a podcast there that gets published every other week. It's about a half-hour to 45-minute show, and I bring in some of the top brewers, and I ask them all about brewing techniques and brewing styles and brewing different beers. Anyways, both of those are available at beersmith.com/blog. The podcast is also available on the iTunes store if you just type in BeerSmith. I have a newsletter as well. It's about 10,000 members on that. The way the newsletter works is actually, if you go sign up from any of my sites, you go to beersmith.com, on the right side, you can sign up for that. But I'll send you an article on beer brewing every week to your inbox, so you can take a look at that. I do have a book out called Homebrewing BeerSmith. It's available on Amazon. It has a brewing focus to it. Actually, it's not software focused. It's focused on beer brewing, and it's a collection of some of the best articles from the blog. And I also have a site called brewwiki.com, which is a brewing wiki. And that's the end of the slideshow. I did open it up for questions at that point. Let me switch back here real quick. I did open up for questions at that point. I got a couple questions. One of them was on upgrading BeerSmith 1 to BeerSmith 2. And there is a number of tools in BeerSmith 2 that let you import your files from BeerSmith 1. There's even a little wizard that'll start up when you start BeerSmith 2 for the first time. So you can try that out. That's the only question I remember off the top of my head, but I'd like to thank you again for inviting me to the conference. And if you need to get a hold of me for any reason, or if you have any questions, there's a contact form. If you go to beersmith.com, go to the very top. It says contact us at the very top of the page there. And that message will go directly to me because I'm an Army of One. I actually run the entire thing, write the software, do the blogging, podcasting, all the other stuff right here out of this little studio in my basement. But thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy your conference.